Yo. If you can hear that noise, pushing the clutch, no noise. Let out, noise. No noise. Noise. That's an input shaft bearing in my transmission. I'm going to rebuild this thing. First thing I'm going to do is get this negative terminal off. Got an air temp sender here. Unplug that. I'm going to take this air box off. Phillips screw is right here. Little hoser clamp on here for the breather. Two 10mm bolts. This should just pop right out. There's a little rubber thing down here that comes out. So I'm going to get in here with a tool of some kind and ow, try to pop that piece of rubber out without hurting myself. Well, there's a bracket with this ground strap, couple 12mm on it. This transmission mount's got some 17mm, there's 3 of them. I gotta leave one of these nuts in here so I can get that other bolt out. There's a 10mm on this starter bracket I'm gonna take off. I got a plug here for the solenoid. And a rubber boot I gotta get out of the way so I can get at the bolt for this. That's a 12mm. Just stick my thumb in here and turn this thing inside out. Couple 14mm for this starter. Technically you can leave this starter in here, but I'm taking it out. Two 12mm on this slave cylinder. There's two 10mm for the slave cylinder line. I can just squirrel this whole thing out of the way. That's good enough. And I got the wheel speed sensor wire. Unplug that. And down here I got a connector. I gotta push in this tab and get it off of this. Pull this connector off. That's for reverse. I'm gonna break out a 17mm. I'm gonna get as many of these bell housing bolts off on the top as I can. That should be all the bolts I'm gonna get at from the top. Now if you're going to be doing a transmission on a garage floor, you can probably just use a jack and put it under the oil pan with a piece block of wood. I'm not going to do that though because I got one of these fancy things. This was actually thrown away at a shop that I worked at, and I had to make some pieces to make it work. I had to bend some bar stock, and I got this piece off of a cane. And anyways, it works good. I use it a lot. But yeah, this supports the engine. You got to support the engine somehow. Remove HX rims. These things are unbelievably light. I have an 1 1/4 socket for this axle mount. If you don't have an impact, you got to take those off with the tire on the ground. I got a couple 10mm I can take off for this brake line. I'll be removing this lower ball joint next. Reason why I got that brake line loose is so I can pull this whole steering knuckle out of the way without it pulling on it. Should be a 17mm on this. Holy, that went flying. Give this a couple whacks with a hammer and kind of loosen this up. That's all it took. And I can pull this axle out of the way. Probably don't need to, but I'm going to take a strap and strap this out of the way. There, that won't be in my way for the remainder of the remainder. Then I can just get under here with a pry bar and pop this axle out. And do the same with the other side. These axles don't usually come out, so I just leave them in here like this. I can do the whole job with it just hanging there. Do the same to the other side. I got to take out the bar on the shift. This is a 12 millimeter. I'm going to pull this all the way back. Give myself a little room. And I got to get in here, and there's this little thing right here you got to take off. This little clip. And then there's a pin in here that you got to pound out with a punch. When I rebuilt this engine, I took this pin out and it went flying. I never could find the thing. So I just made a pin out of a 6 millimeter bolt, and then I put a little dent in it for that clip that goes around it, because once that clip is in, these don't go anywhere. And the dealer didn't have any of these pins. You can buy them. They're like $7, but I figured nuts on it. I would have had to mail order it, so I just used a 6x1 millimeter bolt, and I just cut it to the right length so it fit perfect. And if it's too small, you'll know, because even if that's a little bit too small, your shifter's gonna flop around a whole bunch, and it's not gonna want to shift the way you want it to. Now I can push this back in all the way, get that bar out, give that a tug, get that bar out. On these aluminum oil pans, you got bolts here that bolt the transmission. This bracket bolts the transmission onto the oil pan. If you got a steel oil pan, I don't think these are even there. These are 12 millimeters here. I'm going to take this bracket out. This is a 14 millimeter. I got to get this inspection cover off. There's a 12 millimeter here. There's a 10 millimeter hiding up here. Okay, I'm going to try something a little different, because I don't want to have to take this exhaust off to get that one silly little bolt. So I'm going to try to Ooh. Am I winning? I'm almost winning. Winner. Ha 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 ha. I got a 17 millimeter for my right here. Well, I get to see if my engine support bracket works. If this don't work, this thing's gonna fall on my face pretty soon. These are 19 millimeters. Well, it moved a little, but it didn't fall on my head. That's a plus. Now I got a 19 millimeter to take off here. This is for a mount. And if you're not lucky, this whole stud's going to turn with this nut, and it's going to make the rubber on this mount spin and break and make a big mess, but hopefully I'll just get this out. And I'm lucky. You don't really need to take that out most of the time, but I do, just because it kind of gets in the way. There's 3 17 millimeters here for this mount. This whole mount just slides out. There, now I got one more 17 millimeter bell housing bolt left. There, now if you're tough enough, you can just wiggle this thing out and bench press it right out of here. I'm not going to do that though, I got a training jack. Now as you can see, there's a gap in between the transmission and the engine. That's a dead giveaway that you got all the bolts taken out. If it don't look like that, you probably left a bolt in there or something. Now I got a transmission jack underneath here. It's a good idea, you know, if you want to try to muscle this out of here, you can, but it's a good idea to use a jack and slide it out, because you do not want the transmission hanging on your clutch plate. If you're going to be reusing your clutch, you don't want it hanging on there because you can bend the clutch disc. You got to put it in nice and square the same way too to try not to bend anything. So I'm just going to yank this thing out of here. Anytime you see all this oil all over the inside of the transmission, usually that's a good telltale that the input shaft seal is leaking. You know, it was like that when I rebuilt the engine too, but I just slapped it in because I didn't know how this transmission was going to work. I've been just doing a little bit at a time on this thing, and it shifted really nice. It didn't grind or pop out on me, so the synchronizer should be really good in this, in the rings. But yeah, that seal, I always knew that input shaft seal was leaking a little bit. And if you can hear that, I can feel the noise in this input shaft bearing. So there it is. And if you want to do a clutch and pressure plate, it's right there. That stuff's easy peasy. I got this thing on my bench. If you do this transmission, you might want to drain this before you take it out, just to make sure it doesn't dribble all over you. Pretty filthy. I hope this thing's gonna be okay. Yeah, it wasn't making any bearing noises when I put the thing in and drove it around for most of the summer. Then for about the last month or two, it was making this noise. I kept driving on it. So yeah, this fluid isn't going to look the best. We'll see what the rest of this transmission looks like. Well, that's enough for video number 1. Okay, bye.